Good afternoon, good evening, welcome to the show. We're doing a little bit of a departure this time. We're going to be discussing issues of faith, maybe a little into the esoteric part of things. Joining me is David Mynott and Pat Condon from the organization Share International to help us discuss this. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what Share International is. Give me some background on that, starting with you, David.
It's a loose amalgamation of volunteers worldwide. And we kept it loose on purpose so that there would be no kind of structure or hierarchy and people could come and go at will. And our job is to inform humanity about the reemergence of the world teacher, Maitreya, and his group, the Masters of Wisdom.
Now, would I be on the right page by suggesting that this is somewhat of a messianic belief system here, you know, in a way like a looking for the Messiah? Pat?
Well, many people are expecting the return of the Messiah, the return of Krishna, the return of all these various great heads that we have known in the past. Mm-hmm. In fact, every nationality almost is waiting for something like this. And this is the return of all these people in one person, because he is the head of the spiritual hierarchy that we know of. His name is Maitreya. He is the teacher of all the teachers. He has been the teacher for the last, a long time.
So what you're suggesting then is that this Maitreya, this Messiah, you know, however we phrase it, I guess that depends on which religion, that this person is alive and walking around on the earth today.
Absolutely. He's alive, he's walking around, he's giving television interviews, but not under his name of Matreya, not under the name of, or the guise of Christ. He looks like an average, ordinary, simple man. Mm-hmm. And when he talks very simply so that there's no misinterpretation of what he's saying. And if he came out and said, I am Matreya, everybody, and people, or I am the Christ, people would flock to him and bow. He doesn't want anybody bowing down before him. He's the teacher. He doesn't want to be God, although we are God-like people, he says.
There's an important distinction here. Right. Maitreya is not a religious figure per se, and Maitreya is a name, not a noun. It's not a or the Maitreya. That's simply his name. In ancient Sanskrit, it means bringer of joy. So the joke is kind of on humanity in a way. The figure awaited, as Pat described, by all the major faiths is embodied in this one person, and yet he's really not a religious figure. He's a teacher. He's your friend. He's your brother. He's not here to judge. He's not here to divide people. He's here to help and uplift. So he's not really a religious figure, but he does embody the Christ, the Messiah, the Buddha, the Krishna, the Imam Mahdi, and so on.
Well,
and he is connected to he is the highest part of our current spiritual hierarchy. Okay, so there is a spiritual aspect, but not religious.
When you say that he's connected to the Christ and other names for the Messiah, are you saying that he's divine? Are you saying that he is mortal? Or are you saying that he's something outside of the corporal existence that we all experience?
The important thing to remember here, Chuck, is that we're all divine, for starters, and we're all on a long evolutionary path over hundreds of, at least 100,000 lifetimes. The Masters of Wisdom in Maitreya are humans like us. You'll be a Master of Wisdom one day, as will all of our listening audience. And they've simply completed the path that we're already on. So they're still human, but they're a perfected human being. And when you reach that developmental level, your body is completely composed of light matter. You're immortal. You're a perfected being. There's no longer the death and rebirth cycle. You've broken free of that. Mm-hmm. So you're still a human being, but you're a perfected human being, and we're all headed towards that. So we're all gods in effect, and Maitreya would say your job is to become a god.
Sounds to me very much like, I remember years ago I read the book Siddhartha.
Yes,
by Hermann
Buddha.
Hesse, right?
Yes.
That, you know, this it's a reincarnation piece. There's this emergence into the perfected human being. Mm-hmm. It runs contrary to the Judeo-Christian understanding.
Well, that's an interesting point because actually it is complementary. And there are many references to reincarnation in the Bible, many of which were removed by Emperor Justinian and his wife, because they found it was easier to control their subjects if they thought life was a one-shot deal. But they missed a few because the Pope they ordered to take them all out, he left a few behind. And what we contend is that scientifically, the evidence of the soul will be proven soon, and with that, reincarnation. And so it's really a complementary. There really isn't a contradiction. It's simply been forgotten in the West and misinterpreted in the East.
I want to back up just for 1 minute. When we were talking about where Maitreya came from, Maitreya was born human, as was the Buddha, meaning that the first initial teachers on this earth were not, because we were almost like animals. So the teachers came from other planets, brought in by the Lord of this world. But Maitreya, the Buddha, were both initiates during the Atlantean times. And they've been with us ever since. Now the Buddha has just left the planet not in the last few thousand years, and he's on Shambhala, which is considered like a heavenly place for great ascended masters.
It reminds a little bit of Mormonism, but the other aspect that I think contradicts the Judeo-Christian concept, and I don't know if reincarnation is in the Torah or not. You say it was taken out of the New Testament. I don't know. Maybe
and
not.
a couple left behind.
Right. Okay. But even with that piece, I think that the idea that a human being is a god or is created is not. I mean, the Judaic understanding is that we are created in the image of God, what they call in Latin imago Dei, that we are not God. God is God, that we are not perfected. We're not going to be perfected. Only God's perfect. And that, in a sense, by trying to pose as perfect, and again, I'm talking Judeo-Christian here. I know that the East, it's a different deal. We are almost engaging in an attempt to replace God or to overthrow God, because we can't know the full mysteries. We can't know God's mind. I mean, we're not going to be perfected on earth. We are imperfect beings.
Well, Maitreya says over and over, God is within you, God is around you, God is everything you inhale, everything you see, God is all things.
Yeah, but we're still not gods.
We're not gods in the sense that we are perfected beings, us.
Right.
But we, as humans, that is why we have reincarnation, is to perfect. And we go through millions of lifetimes to become these beings of light. And they're godlike beings.
Again, I mean, I think that gets into an Eastern concept. You say that the Maitreya has spoken on television. He's not identifying himself. He just comes across in various guises. What is he saying? What is the message? Is there a moral and ethical code there?
Yes, the message of Maitreya and the Masters, Chuck, is share and save the world. And their priorities are end world starvation, hunger. We have 25,000 people dying every day on a planet with a 12% food surplus. Nobody should be going hungry. All that's missing is the political will to care for our brethren. Number two, a restoration of the ecology, because ecologically we're at the precipice and we need to pull back, and we will pull back in time. Also, in addition to food, housing, health care, education, justice and equality for all, and world peace. These are the priorities of the Masters.
Sounds like an international nanny state.
International nanny state?
Yes.
Oh, maybe you want to explain.
Well, I mean, it sounds almost like a spiritual communism to me. That, in a sense, you're saying that everything has to be shared equally. There's no more sovereign nations, no more private ownership. No?
No, that's not it.
Okay.
It doesn't mean everything has to be shared equally, because it means that food should be shared. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to take my potato and send it to Russia or wherever they're starving. It means that countries know what they're throwing away and what they need. and it'll be taken care of on a huge national basis. It's not on a little house-to-house basis.
Let me give you an example, Chuck. This era that they're ushering in is the age of Aquarius. We've just come out of the age of Pisces, and now we're in the age of Aquarius. And Maitreya is the world teacher for the Aquarian age. And some of the characteristics are synthesis, unity, brotherhood, world peace. So when we talk about synthesis, Chuck, we're talking politically as well. No more just it's socialism or it's capitalism. It's social democracy, democratic socialism. And when you talk about sharing, what will be set up is an organization within the UN that'll help all the countries of the world take stock of what they have in excess, and what you have extra will be pooled together and then redistributed to where it's needed during the world, throughout the world. And this is voluntary. So this is not compulsory, and it doesn't mean you have to give up any of your belongings.
Sounds like from each according to his ability to each according to his need.
And we will be
which
leading
is the motto of the Communist Manifesto, by the way. But
more simple lives. We will definitely not have 20 pairs of shoes, I don't think, in the age of,
who decides that?
We do. We won't want them.
Well, what if somebody does?
Pardon?
What if somebody?
No,
I mean, not that I do.
From what
I
I've
mean,
read,
I'm
keep
happy
them.
with just 2
They would
pairs.
keep them.
people can have anything, if they want a big house, they'll have a big house. But most people will live more simply.
Well, I mean, I hope so, but I mean, I'd
Because
rather see the
houses and things will not be the center of our lives. Money will not be the center of our lives. Creating joy, creating...
Well, money is just an abstract expression of creation. I mean, and also, I mean, I'd rather see people, making those decisions themselves. I mean, when somebody...
They will be.
When somebody builds a big house, that puts a lot of people to work, and it creates...
That's right.
They're creating something out of nothing. That money just is an abstract way to exchange so that can happen.
You're right that money in itself is just energy, Chuck. It's neither good nor bad. It depends on how it's used.
Right.
Money is not the root of all evil. Complacency is. You've heard those phrases like, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. Mm-hmm. So in this case, in this era, what we're talking about is people doing things voluntarily. No one will be forced or coerced.
Well, I mean,
Free will will always be
what you're describing.
sacrosanct.
Okay. No, I'm glad to know that, because what you're describing, and maybe we could kind of go into the weeds a little bit more here, is something that seems pretty innocuous. Sure, we don't want to see starvation in the world. I don't think anybody does. I mean, if you see a nation that's dealing with starvation, I mean, the American people, for starters, are among the most generous people in the world.
Absolutely.
And they'll come in. I know Israel does this. They develop these Ziploc bags which save food in countries where they didn't have that before. I mean, there are ways to deal with that. But I think that you're talking about something a little bigger here.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. I want to kind of pierce through the nice sounding jargon, because
Rhetoric.
everybody, I mean, is everyone against, I'm in favor of starvation. Yeah, sure. I mean, we all want to make sure that nobody's starving to death in the world. And, I think that there are ways to go about it. I mean, we could look at the political question of why that happens. Mm-hmm. Where are you guys on the question of population control?
Well, the masters aren't about controlling the population. They have predicted that over time, Chuck, that the population of the planet will stabilize. Right. But they are in favor of people having access to, as we said, proper housing, food, health care, and so on. And statistically, it's been proven that when people have their basic needs fulfilled, the birth rate goes down.
True. And also, I mean, what you're talking about, which is health care and all those things, we have that in this country because we are freer and because we have more private ownership. I mean, countries that don't have those, that they have lower standards, are countries that are more authoritarian, and they don't have the development of these basic institutions that make us free, like ownership of property and like business.
But there are exceptions, of course, too. If you think of a country like Cuba, they have better universal health care, I think, in some ways than the States do, or anyways, what we did have for years. So there are exceptions. Broadly speaking, in modern history, with the West, you had, with capitalism, you had freedom but not justice. And with communism, you had justice but not freedom. As Maitreya had said, the wagon can't run on one wheel. It needs two. And all of these things, believe it or not, capitalism, communism, even fascism, all these were originally divinely inspired, and of course they got corrupted over time, obviously. And so what he's saying is that in this era, all these things get combined and reconciled. And it's also the eastern and western halves of the earth coming together. And if you want a metaphor for that, it would be the reunification of Berlin, for example.
Well, that was because communism finally imploded on its own rot.
And you see the two
And
systems
people-
came together.
And
Right.
people wanted it down.
Well, no, the systems didn't come together. Communism failed. And
But-
today, Germany is the most freedom-oriented capitalist country in Europe.
But they still merged in a sense. But you did bring up something important. Some evidence of Maitreya's influence in the world in recent years would be the dissolution of the Soviet Union, since he spoke to Gorbachev, the end of apartheid in South Africa, since he visited with Nelson Mandela in his prison cell,
And de Klerk.
and de Klerk, and many other world leaders behind the scenes privately, and inspired them. And their energy too, the energy of the masters, is with any group that's progressive. And they have been with progressive movements throughout the history of the United States. Women's movement, civil rights movement, gay rights, more recent you could say Black Lives Matter, the Civil War.
Occupy.
Yes, Occupy Wall Street, our Revolutionary War, the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution. Their energy has always been there, assisting people working for justice.
What about the American Revolution?
The American Revolution too.
Yeah, but I think that, this to me seems like an incredible, and I don't know how else to put this, but bluntly, you're taking credit for a lot of stuff.
Well,
you're putting your name onto.
They were predicted
Events.
before they happened
Well, we're
in
not-
Share International magazine.
we're not saying that they brought these things about.
Not-
We're saying that they assisted. They were like cheerleaders behind the scene and advisors. Remember, we were talking before the program about making reference to the Cuban Missile Crisis and FDR and Bush and 9/11. And we can go into that further if you like. These are some
Yeah.
examples of where
Sure.
they put their 2 cents in.
Do you think they put their 2 cents into the events of 9/11?
Yes, 2 months before the attacks, through their contacts in the diplomatic corps, the hierarchy had made the Bush administration aware, thank you, that's the word I was searching for, that these types of attacks were likely to occur using planes.
Sure.
Now, there was no conspiracy. It was simply a lack of communication between...
Okay. I think that everybody knew something was coming down. Including
Yes.
Bush, and there was a lot of security. We just
Yes.
didn't know what. We have a caller. Hello, you're on the air.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I have a question, and my question is, what is the true definition of justice?
That's a good question.
Justice?
The true definition of justice, according to the Ageless Wisdom teaching and the Masters of Wisdom, would be that everyone has their basic human rights met. Food, housing, healthcare, education, justice and equality for all, and world peace, and a restored planet. That would be
Pat?
justice.
We
Yeah.
would recognize each other as brothers instead of fearful of walking down the street, fearful of another country, fearful of all the things we fear in this world. Once we see each other as brothers, as individual souls, then we would, once we learn this, we will learn this when Maitreya shows his stuff on the day of declaration. He's going to show us our hearts.
Maybe I take more of a kind of a utilitarian view here, but I think that justice is a system, an imperfect system in government that basically tries to balance the scales when there's an injustice. Like, for example, if somebody kills you or somebody commits a crime or
You're
they
speaking
rob.
like a lawyer.
Well, it's a separate.
But it's going to be on the heart level too.
Well, of course. Well, everything comes into play, but the point is that if something unjust happens, someone does something unjust to another person or group, then you have a system that's supposed to operate imperfectly but separately that tries to balance the scales, even though you can't redo history.
Yes.
That's why in a trial, somebody could be incarcerated, somebody could be fined, because you can't undo the crime. So if you have a system of justice in place which is able to mete out justice in an imperfect way, but yet in a real way, then you're going to have more amicable relationships between people, because they're going to know that there's going to be a consequence for injustice. Caller? Okay, he's gone.
But right now in our schools, we're reading in the paper where black students are feeling like they're being ostracized and stereotyped. And this is not something that goes before a judge or a policeman. This comes from people that are being stupid in their hearts.
Well, I agree. Look, I mean, I've been ostracized for being conservative. I mean, we all have our, in a way.
And I for being progressive.
There you go. And I'm sure, I don't doubt it. But so the thing is that it's an unfortunate side of life that we deal with people's judgments, and sometimes those judgments can not be based on who you are. I mean, people think things about me because I'm conservative, which may or may not be true. And even if they are true, it's not worthy of the kind of bigotry that I've had to put up with. And so I think
That's
that,
right.
and yet at the same time, I recognize that that's just the dark side of human nature. I'm going to get on with my life, and I'm going to teach what I teach. And I think that you can't have a system that changes that. I think it was President.
Well, see, that's what we believe, though. We believe that when Maitreya comes and gives his declaration to every man on this earth, it will affect us. It will change. We will feel it. Every person will feel it. This great love in their hearts. He will tell us a short history of our whole human race. He will show us how long it takes to become perfected, and he will show us that we are truly brothers. And I believe that it's going to happen, maybe not right away, but I think it's going to grow, that we are going to become great, great fellow men to each other.
And Chuck, let me speak to that a little less abstractly, what you were discussing. One of the things the Ageless Wisdom teaching discusses, and the masters will teach when they arrive openly, and Maitreya is teaching now, and Ben has mentioned in his books, is that people are multidimensional. You have a mental body, physical body, emotional body, but those aren't you. Those are your vehicles. The real you stands behind that. So when people are attacking you for being conservative, they're attacking an image that they have in their mind of you, not you.
I agree. Oh, sure.
They don't even know you. And
We have a caller on the line.
Oh.
Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm listening to your guests. They're sounding very fascinating. And you were talking about the communist system coming down. When I looked at the market, it looks like the capitalist one's about to come down, too. What's going on with the market? Does that have anything to do with what's going on? Thank you.
Well, he's asking about the market, the stock market.
Absolutely.
let's address that.
But briefly, I just want to say that I would argue that capitalism is natural to the human being.
But it's in an abnormal place right
Well,
now.
the point is we might twist it, but it's the natural way to be. I mean, private property is natural. Animals
right.
understand
That's
it.
right.
Plants understand it. The bird understands that they have a nest. You try to go into the territory of a dog, you'll see what happens, right? I mean, so property is a normal, natural function, and
That's
in
right.
an enlightened society, we put together a system of laws that protect people's property.
Right.
So that, to me, capitalism is not an ism. It's just the way of the world. Communism, I would argue, and other socialistic ideas are unnatural because they coerce people to do things against their will, and they are calling for this. I mean, to get into it, this perfectibility on earth, which is unnatural, in my opinion. We're not perfect. We're going to die. We're mortals.
We will die.
We're going to go the way of nature. We're not going to. So we can take this brief time on earth and try to make the world a better place, but we're not going to perfect it.
Well, let's take a broader view of this, Chuck. Part of what we're talking about, too, you heard me make reference to the Piscean age, which might confuse people. It's not necessarily it's astrology. It's the planet, and an astronomer will tell you this, is oriented towards a particular constellation for roughly 2,000 years, And starting with Jesus, who inaugurated the age of Pisces, fisher of men, we started the Piscean age. Now we're ending that and coming to the Aquarian age. One of the hallmarks of the Piscean age was a sense of individuality. If you went back 2,000 years ago, it was more of a herd mentality. They didn't think as abstractly as you do today.
They didn't think.
So what I'm
That's
saying,
interesting.
what I'm saying is the Piscean structures developed during the last 2,000 years no longer function. The energy has changed, it's being withdrawn, and they're falling apart.
We'll talk about the Aquarian age when we come back. We're going to take a brief break. We have a couple of public service announcements.
We didn't address them.
Oh, that's
yes.
okay, we'll get there.